welcome to the Theology Pugcast. It's great to have you. And we are here at Artisanal Burger Company in Manchester, Connecticut. And we've got a live studio audience. Say the obligatory, yay! Yay! All right. Thank you very much. Anyway, we're excited to have, actual, stuff going on in front of each other. It's a lot better than the virtual stuff. Anyway, I'm C.R. Wiley. I'm a pastor. I'm serving a church right now in the Pacific Northwest, and I'm glad to do that. And I'm a writer, and I've done some other stuff, but enough about me. Why don't we talk about you, Glenn?
I'm Glenn Sunshine. I'm a senior fellow at the Colson Center for Christian Worldview, professor emeritus of history at Central Connecticut State University, and I run a ministry called Every Spring Age Ministries.
Good stuff. And Glenn is going to be getting some food, but he promised not to smack his lips right into the microphone.
Well, I'm tempted to say I shouldn't make promises I can't keep, but I'll do my best.
Right. Now, Tom, you've already eaten.
I have, but I still do not make promises not to make strange sounds here. I have a knack for it. But Tom Price, systematic theologian, Christian ethicist. I teach at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary and other places.
All right, great. Well, today is my day. I've been thinking a little bit about what to talk about, and I've been reflecting upon the statement that we hear sometimes, not sometimes, a lot from folks on the left, and that statement is the personal is political. Personal is political. So I know that we're familiar with that statement, and there are a lot of folks today for whom it almost seems as though it's, I guess, common sense that the personal should be political. And that at one time the personal was not considered political, it was considered pre-political. It kind of strikes them as odd. So I'd like to step back and think a little bit about the way people used to think about politics and where politics began and where it ended and why everything couldn't be sort of lumped under the category of political. So politics, let's think a little bit about politics. What is politics? Well, when we think about politics, we think about the polis, the city. That's what the Greek word polis means, this refers to. And we've talked about this before. We've got different words that we use that are derived from polis, like polite. A person is polite if he's urbane. There's an interesting way of kind of tying it together. And is sort of capable of living fruitfully alongside other people in a community. So, a person who's polite is pleasant to be around and work with.
Yeah, it's worth noting that when you go back to ancient Greece, the Greeks really identified very strongly with the city that they were from. Being a citizen meant being really very much a political person, that
right.
you were actively engaged in the life of the city. This was considered really central to your identity.
Right.
And the interesting thing about that is that if you were an individual, if you weren't actively participating in the life of the city, you were referred to as an idios, or a plural idiotes, from which we get the word idiot. It means an individual in Greek.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So individualism is idiotic.
And in some forms, I guess. And one of the things that goes with that is, especially in Greece, there tended to be the kind of this notion on the kind of social and political harmony and order that kind of mimicked the cosmic order, and found itself also to be to be a kind of a human being. Fulfilling what one was as a political animal meant to be ordered, similar, a microcosm of the whole.
Yeah, all these things tie together, and people who kind of do the deep dive in this stuff see the connections, and it's like, wow, that means this leads to that. It's great stuff. Other words, that we derive from the word polis, police, for example, keeping the order of the city, an important thing. But the idea... go ahead.
I'd just like to actually point something else out, that if you go to Latin instead of Greek, the equivalent of the Latin polis is civitas, from which we get words like civilization.
Oh, yeah.
And a whole bunch of other things, too.
Yeah. So we see parallels in different languages, and those are things that are worth reflecting on. I think what it implies to me, anyway, there are two ways you could think about it. You could say, well, one civilization or worldview influenced another, or you could say that there's something real here that people arrived at independently, of each other in their own ways through their own particular cultural stories. But and I'm inclined to think that both can be the case. But I think getting back to this whole matter of politics, then, what constitutes politics? For the ancients, it was the deliberative process of free citizens who were engaged in, debate and discussion concerning the common good, the good of their city. That was politics. Which leaves space then for other things. In other words, there's political matters, and then there's other stuff. And some of the other things are really important, like friendship. Now, are we willing to say that friendship is necessarily political? Well, if the personal is political, I don't see why not. We could call into question our choices in friends, and sometimes you see that in certain situations. Like I've come across, stories that talk about do-gooder elementary school teachers who discourage best friends, kids from forming, friendships and making them best friendships, that kind of thing, because they're exclusive, because if you're my best friend, that means that poor little Susie over there who doesn't have a friend is left out. So no one's allowed to have any friends. I've read about stuff like this. Yeah. Because what this implies, then, if the personal is political, then authorities who are in charge of the institutions of the city really have no limit to when it comes to what they can get involved in.
I remember reading an article a couple of years ago from a news article about a family that was part of the Catholic worker kind of movement.
Dorothy Day stuff, yeah.
Yes, and one of the things that he talked about was a child who grew up in a household whose family brought in a lot of other kids, and to almost create a commune was their sense of frustration and loss of being the children of the parents.
Yeah.
And how they kind of, as they grew older, they kind of saw what was going on, but they really had a resentment they couldn't shake because of that kind of breakdown in something that otherwise did demand a certain exclusivity.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I think that's a very, very good point. I think that there are idealistic people who fail to give proper recognition to the legitimate claims that some people have on them that exclude other people.
Right.
Like my child has a stronger claim on me than the kid down the street who's living in a box.
Yeah, it might be worth noting where this idea the personal is political comes from.
Sure.
It arises really with feminism.
Yep.
And as the feminists were trying to change society, they thought, the way they figured it, the personal relationship of husband and wife, all of these kinds of things had political overtones because politics was the route through which you changed society.
Right.
Therefore, for their cause, anything that involved gender relationships was automatically political.
Yeah. Now, the older understanding is that the relationship between a husband and wife is pre-political. In other words, it's something that exists by the nature of things. And this gets me to, the point that I really think is the place to begin. And that is you have to have a sense of what is natural. And when we talk about what's natural, what is also normative. So in other words, nature is not simply stuff happening, matter in motion and, meaningless collisions and stuff like that. But there's some kind of meaningful sort of reality that we dwell in, that it comes it's already uploaded.
That's right.
We enter into it.
And I know, I've been noticing as I've been reading various otherwise pretty sound theologians recently, even in the evangelical world.
We have those?
Yeah, we do have them, a few of them. But one of the things I was noticing, though, is this increasing almost surrendering territory to saying that...
Oh, they love to do that.
To say that, well, nature basically, if we look at across history, is basically different conceptions based on different historicism.
Yep.
And then the other thing is that therefore we really can't delineate anything that is really nature. And so we need, now their thing is the Christian narrative illumines and makes intelligible. But I think they've retreated too much.
Yeah.
And a lot of these people know better. I mean, some of them have worked heavily in the sciences, and what else are they dealing with regularly? But the thing is that I don't buy that.
No.
I think we know very clearly that there are aspects that we gravitate towards, even as humans, or humans and the family and the like. That yes, there may be a variety of forms that have been taken through history and fallen history, but nevertheless, there's an affinity there where you can delineate certain norms that have been generally constant. That when you do see it in the light of Revelation, and the ends for which human relationships flourish, you can see that natural law very, very, I think, confidently.
Yeah, we don't find ourselves, stepping into, situations where we have a culture that doesn't know what a father is.
That's right. Yeah.
or know what a mother is. There are names for these persons, sisters, cousins. In fact, there are names that we don't have in English for relations that are natural. When we get to, 2 and 3 cousins out, stuff like that.
Well, this is why there's, I think, so much emphasis and force on trying to basically implode these terms and these categories.
That's right.
Because of their affinity with the natural.
Yeah. So when we talk about the pre-political, we're talking about relationships that are, relationships that form whether or not, or can form whether or not, there is a political institution that validates these things or not. Political institutions are valuable. We are political animals, but we're not just political animals. And there are things that we bring to the political realm that were not derived from the political realm. You see what I'm getting at?
One place that it's worth looking here is the Genesis.
Yeah.
Pre-political. That pre can be can mean a couple of different things, but if you look at it simply chronologically, look at the book of Genesis and what was in place in Genesis prior to the development of human government.
Yeah, there was a relationship between a man and a woman.
What you see is family.
Yeah.
What you see is work. Mm-hmm. What you see is, of course, relationship with God.
Yep.
What you see is...
Image of God.
Image of God.
Right.
What you see are a series of unalienable rights that you can trace to what God gave Adam and Eve in Genesis.
Right.
You see science. You see, by implication, education.
You see hierarchy.
You see hierarchy.
Yep.
All of these things are there before government, and therefore government cannot claim legitimate authority over any of them.
Right. And furthermore, human governments can't overcome these things. They can't obliterate these things. In fact, the presupposition of the category of the pre-political is that if you get rid of the pre-political, you get rid of the political.
Yeah.
In other words, you've got to have certain things in place before politics can even be, done.
Yeah. And that's, I think, coupled that with, as we were chatting a little bit prior to the show, is the kind of the transcendental vision that Christianity has affirmed. is this notion that human beings are also not the highest thing of value. And because of that, therefore, humans being political animals is not the highest thing about them. There's a higher limit there.
Right.
And so, of course, their determination by that to which they owe all of their existence, first and foremost, they're limited on that end. In other words, we are always dependent on the Creator for what we are and the form in which we enact. Always. You can't eradicate that. That's what it means to be a creature that is finite. And then also that there are ordained ends that are also pre-political.
Yes.
They are not established by, they may be supported by, but they are not established by the political.
Yeah. So to make the personal political, I think, is to kind of engage in a kind of a Sisyphus-like, project. Reality is, it's inclined against the project. They cannot win.
Yeah.
Now, they're willing to go transhuman on us.
Yeah.
They're willing to actually harm and defile and maim human bodies to get what they want.
Yeah.
But even then, it can't work.
Yeah.
There's so much energy, money, labor, involved in this whole transhumanist project that sort of obliterate natural distinctions and create this kind of crazy self-actualized world, or a world in which people can self-actualize into anything they want to become.
Yeah. Well, actually, I'm not sure transhumanism is quite the right word for this, but what strikes me here is where you started off on your definition of politics. A cooperative system of making decision-making for society. We are largely replacing politics in that sense with technocracy.
That's true.
And there is really less and less room for political processes as classically understood, because they're being replaced by technocrats, which ultimately is the high road to totalitarianism, one of them. But that, when you talk about losing the pre-political means you lose the political. If you understand politics that way, it just follows like night and day.
Right. Well, and this brings us to, I think a discussion of the nature of limited government. Is limited government a thing of the past? If we have technocracy that we're dealing with, which which aspires to a kind of totalism, defining us all the way down, and kind of almost in a Brave New World kind of way, and no limits, no recognized limits on the political, what is, a legitimate subject for political discussion. Then, the whole notion that government is limited, which is, I think, the understanding that we inherited as Americans of our democracy. It seems to me that that's under threat in ways that are, existential in the sense that the very ground under which that kind of, approach to politics is no longer possible.
Yeah, I would say that's absolutely the case, because, the nature of totalitarianism is their total control of all of life. And these kinds of things are effectively totalitarian projects. Once you eliminate a sphere once you eliminate spheres in which the government is not allowed to operate. In other words, once you allow the government to take over pretty much all the different spheres, you've got totalitarianism almost by definition.
So now we're into Kuyperian sphere sovereignty.
Right.
Maybe you can spend a little time helping folks understand what that is, Glenn.
Yeah, Abraham Kuyper was a theologian, a politician, and a journalist. Mm-hmm. All of the above. Yeah,
and he did it all like in the normal time span that all of us have.
Right, yeah. And Kuyper argued for an idea that got termed sphere sovereignty. The idea here is that God has ordained in the world different spheres, each of which is supposed to operate autonomously, government being one of them, but only one of them. So you have religion, you have the family, you have industry, you have labor, you have education, you have science, you have a whole series of these kinds of things. And fundamentally, each of them is supposed to govern its own affairs. Government is one of those, but it doesn't really have legitimate authority in anything other than its own sphere.
And that sphere is more or less helping to adjudicate the boundaries of the others. I would
to a large extent it's that, but also defense and things of that sort.
Right.
And the problem comes, what happens when a sphere stops operating well?
Right.
And that's usually referred to as what happens when a sphere collapses.
Right.
Think of the financial crisis.
Yep.
You know, the bubbles in the economy where things blow up and the economy collapses because big business is not behaving well. You know, things like that. So what happens when a sphere collapses? Well, what has to happen is another sphere has to step in to allow time for that sphere to rebuild itself so it can start operating correctly. Most often what that means is the government is going to step in and do it, but once the government does that, it doesn't relinquish power lightly.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, it's a lot like Sauron.
That's right.
He does not share power.
That's right. Right. Now, I think it'd be worthwhile maybe distinguishing sphere sovereignty from subsidiarity. You know, that's a Catholic approach. You know, what as I've talked to, Reformed and Catholic thinkers on this matter. You know, with subsidiarity, you have kind of a vertical orientation.
Right. The basic idea in subsidiarity is that problems are best solved in as local a level as possible.
Right.
The idea being that the more people, and this actually fits in very nicely with a lot of Reformed thought as well, the more people you involve in something unnecessarily, the worse your result is going to be, and the more injustice, frankly, is introduced.
Yeah. And we just had a lot of guys introduce a lot of food to the table.
Yeah.
So we've had some food delivered, and everybody's happy, smiling, chewing. Anyway, so back to subsidiarity versus sphere sovereignty. Now, are these mutually sort of incompatible?
They're not the same thing, but I think that they work together pretty nicely.
Yeah.
Catholic social thought operates in slightly different terms than Kuyperianism does.
Sure.
Yeah.
It is worth noting, though, that there's a guy, theologian, I don't know if he's still there, but he used to be at Calvin. I'm blanking out on his name at the moment, wrote a book called The Good of Affluence. And he argued for something that he called moral proximity.
Okay,
Yeah.
so this is Calvin.
This is at Calvin College. He's Reformed.
He's Reformed, and he's for prosperity.
Right.
Probably not there anymore.
It's called The Good of Affluence. Now,
But you get my point. He's probably not there anymore.
Right. So, but his argument was that the idea of moral proximity is that you have greater responsibilities to the people you are morally proximate to.
Right.
So, for example, I have great responsibilities to my wife, to my kids.
Yep.
I have serious responsibilities to my church and my community. I have responsibilities to ministries I have direct connections with in Sierra Leone and Peru. I have much less responsibilities to ministries I don't have direct connections to.
Right.
So this is why, it isn't incumbent on me to give away all my money to feed children in a place that I have really no contact with.
Right.
Even though they have, in a sense, a claim on me, there are people who have greater claims, and therefore I need to take care of those first.
Yeah.
That is the flip side of subsidiarity.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's the reformed, that is subsidiarity in a reformed context, talking about what our personal responsibilities look like.
So if I'm getting this correct, if I'm sort of interpreting the description of subsidiarity and moral proximity correctly, the agency with regard to subsidiarity is more in lines with institutions. And when we're talking about moral proximity, we're talking more along the lines of moral agents.
Yeah, subsidiarity can apply to individuals as well. as an individual, if my kids have a problem or my wife has a problem, I should do my best to handle that.
Right.
If it's beyond my capability, then maybe there's another local institution that could step in and help.
Right. Right.
So it can involve individuals, but it does extend into an institutional area. Moral proximity can do the same thing. So I talked about my responsibilities. My church has responsibilities to a community in Barranca, Peru, because we have strong relationships there.
Right.
So that can also be an institutional issue as well. Really, the key here is, in one case, who is responsible for fixing the problem, and in the other case, who am I responsible to?
So, with,
like I said, they're opposite sides of the same coin, basically.
So when we're referring to pre-political institutions, families, etc.
Yeah.
There's an understanding that that when these things are working well, they're taking care of a number of their needs on their own.
Right. So let's take a simple example. These are old numbers. I don't know what the current stats are, but some time ago I was reading that if you give $1 to charity, 70% of it, on the average, goes to the person who's in need, that the charity is dedicated toward. When government spends money on charitable activities, and I don't know whether you can really use charity with respect to government.
Sure.
But when government does that, 30 cents goes to the recipient.
Yeah.
70 cents of it is eaten up by government bureaucracy. Now, here's the question. What is a more effective way of getting aid to the poor?
Right.
And that's subsidiarity. This is an outgrowth of the ideas of subsidiarity. This is what you would expect.
Right. So we see other institutions sort of fill in the gap when we're talking about pre-political institutions, and there's a failure on those institutions, on the part of those institutions, to do the things that they should be doing for themselves, and then we see these other things fill in the gap.
Historically, we're actually working in, I would say the direction really goes the other way. Historically, the government began usurping responsibilities that had been picked up by the local community. Once the government began doing that, community institutions, private charity, and things like that went on the decline.
So what we're talking about now are what are sometimes referred to as mediating institutions.
Right.
Right.
I would refer to it as government usurpation of responsibilities that are not properly theirs.
Right. Well, that's the thing. That's the problem. But what they're supplanting is what you were referring to before. These local institutions, which maybe sort of voluntary associations. Well,
right.
We talked about guilds, for example.
Voluntary associations, church charitable giving, neighbors helping neighbors.
Sure. Yeah. When people think that, there's some agency that's going to take care of so-and-so, I don't need to do anything, then there's a kind of passivity that sets in, and people just assume more or less that the people that they should be taking care of are going to be taken care of.
The assumption is that federal programs work more effectively than local programs.
I think that's true. I think a lot of people think that,
right.
But that's not the case.
And so the net result, though, with a federal program is you get a one-size-fits-none policy.
Right. Well, this is something that would be worth thinking a little bit about, and that is, why are we such saps for this sort of thing? In other words, I think that most people, if you ask them about government programs, they'll say, well, yeah, they don't really work all that well. But then they will call into question anybody who calls them into question.
Well, there's a long history to why, but I think what happens increasingly as we experience it is that government basically is a substitute now for so many of those other pre-political places, to the point that you almost by default expect it to jump in and take care of everything.
Right.
And when it doesn't, you're almost placed in let's think of what's going on. Let's think of last summer, when you had cities burning for political reasons.
Sure.
And people are expecting government to come in at this point, and government's actually taking a side.
That's right. No, we are for burning the city down.
That's right.
We're all about that.
Or acting like it doesn't exist. I mean, but here you have, a classic situation in which people are sitting there waiting for someone to come in and do something. And I think in that area, they probably should expect, as part of being a citizen, that part of what you pay for with your taxes and stuff is to protect someone to come in and protect you from something that could do you harm.
Which is precisely one of the core functions of government.
Yeah.
Which is precisely what they gave up.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. And so what it does is it shows all those vulnerability areas, but I think that the psychological impact of that is, how do I now have to readjust so that I accept this about the government in such a way that I'm not going to expect this, I have to be the one who has to somehow conform to this new set of arrangements. So there is, by creating this dependency,
right,
and then failing to come in where you would expect it, the dependency is already created, and so now you have conformity.
Right.
And I think this is this is my sense, just intuitively, of why people have become so passive.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yep. Well, then,
except keep in mind that gun sales have been going through the roof.
Right.
Yeah.
So people are saying, all right, I need to take care of this.
Yeah. Now that's one thing that people do. And I do think that there are other things that people do, but this whole matter of recovering moral agency.
And just before it slips my mind, I think, classically, Christians in particular have been institution builders.
Right.
And we are seeing this has been going on a long time. We talked about last week, Dewey and the indoctrination system of education, for example, in the U.S.
Right.
And how Christians have kind of moved independently to maybe homeschooling, but really have been many steps behind what they classically did. I mean, we did a show sometime back, Len did, on Ireland and the way in which institutions. But here's another place where you become dependent, as society becomes dependent, trusting the government to basically reaffirm parents and their educating children and their values. Right. Now you have actually school boards telling parents that they're acting like a bunch of babies that they're not going to listen to.
Right. Yeah, I remember being a part of the Parents' Rights Initiative in Massachusetts back in the day, Brian Kamaker and mass resistance and all of that. And I didn't have any illusions about, the public school authorities. I pretty much knew that they were, their aspirations were just way out of line, and that they didn't have much regard for parental authority at all.
Yeah.
And it was all, reinforced for me in public hearings where I would sit and listen to these public school officials basically, display their contempt for parents.
Yeah.
But I don't think that parents really get that. I don't think that most parents really have a sense for how low they are in the estimation of most public school teachers and officials.
And how those school teachers, not necessarily the teachers themselves, though increasingly so, but definitely the higher up the chain you go, how much they believe those children really belong to them in the state and not to the parents.
That's right. Well, they think of themselves as liberators.
That's right.
Delivering these children from the benighted attitudes of their parents. Right. So,
interestingly enough, there's a backlash. Yeah. Not surprisingly, I saw someone who's arguing that they should put cameras in classrooms so the parents can monitor what their kids are learning.
Yeah.
Largely in reaction to what happened during COVID, where parents were not permitted to watch what their kids were doing.
Yeah, just think about that. I'm not allowed to see what my child is being taught, and then my child is supposed to come to me for help on his homework.
And I think more stunning, and I guess we kind of hit on this all the time, but we've all been enough in institutions of higher ed And we know we've been around these theories and the people who promote them and the people who came up with them, for that matter.
Right.
And when you start to realize how weak-kneed they actually are and how grounded on nothing, and that the arrogance that they have, that they know better than people,
right,
just from their common experience of being a human creature living in the world, it's just unbelievable.
Right.
I mean, it's stunning the way we submit, in a sense, that God-given pre-political gift endowment we have to kind of guide and direct our children, that is far more incredible than the theoretical dispositions of people coming up with this stuff in the laboratory.
So let's go back.
And by the way, a lot of that stuff started with Rousseau.
Yeah.
So let's go back to the nature of the pre-political and how it's understood and justified. So, if you read someone like Aristotle, you're not reading a Christian. Nevertheless, there was a sense in which Aristotle, based his thinking upon a natural order which was immutable. It was just simply the way things are, and that was the pre-political. So he had an understanding of the natural order as being an eternal, thing. There was a sense in which, in Aristotelian thinking, it's always just been this way, and then you've got forms and types that are, just rock solid and don't change.
And it is grounded, and though he didn't have the kind of Christian view of transcendence, there was still, he was hinting at a orderer, if you will, and
right,
something that gave depth to all of that
But it was an unconscious creator.
That's right. Yes.
And I guess what I'm getting at is that I do think that the Christian contribution to the understanding of the pre-political is important. I'd like to think a little bit about that. But I also think that the Christian understanding introduces something to the understanding of the pre-political, which in the wrong hands becomes something entirely hostile to the pre-political. So let's think a little bit about that. So if we have we've talked about this in many episodes of the show. If we have a creation, and we have a given order of things and forms and types and kinds and so forth, as you've talked about, Tom, and a transcendent creator who has gifted these things to be as they are, gifted us with these things so that they are what they are. We have a stable basis, a strong rationale for the pre-political.
Yeah.
We talked about it a little bit with, creation and Genesis and so forth. Now I'm talking about it more sort of theologically. But things have altered, and we've talked about this many times, but maybe you can fill out a little bit, Tom, what is the Christian contribution to the pre-political, the understanding of the pre-political that made Christian politics what it was?
In terms of kind of adding to that generic understanding that Aristotle.
Yeah, I guess adding to that, or maybe something brand new. Or...
Well, I think once the Christian vision of transcendence comes in, and which interestingly comes with their focus on Christology. It wasn't just Christians focusing on what the Bible talked about, creation itself, but it was actually the understanding of creation in light of Logos, the eternal Logos, which therefore, as John's Gospel said, is kind of illumines all things, but is at the heart of all of creation. So what you have introduced there is Logos that was hinted around with the Stoics and hinted around with the different natural law theories and theories of forms. And then even with Plato, you had some notion of a summum bonum, an ultimate good, which is the fundamental reality that gives meaning and depth to all of the creaturely forms, if you will. Christianity comes in and basically weaves this whole picture together, but grounded in a vision that alters all of that in fundamental ways. First of all, it is no longer merely an eternal, immutable natural order, but it is contingent, and it is directing itself towards a higher end, a transcendental end. So whereas for Aristotle, you have, say, a human creature, well, it has a natural form, and it is teleological. What a thing is both what it is in potential, but really what it is once it has reached.
In other words, it doesn't have a future in God.
That's right. Its future is not in God, and it's not the beatific vision, if you will.
Right.
And so you don't have that. You don't have radiating through the whole understanding of reality prior to Christianity, the glory of God and God's presence to all things as both the creator and sustainer of everything, but also the chief end.
Right.
And so if you're talking here, you saw a radical limit also brought into the picture where creation and order and even the cosmos wasn't everything. Mm-hmm. There was a huge limit. In a sense, you could think of it just, I'm using an analogy here of Genesis, where you have your 6 days and then you have a Sabbath rest. It places a limit on and all the rest there. So you have the creaturely is not everything. And the creaturely is ordered towards the transcendent, God in Christ,
right.
In a way that impacts and affects everything else. And so what do you get when you get to the political, for example? Well, you have secular, for example, is not understood as a space in which the political has its own. I mean, this is where I think classically Christianity would maybe bump up a little bit against Kuyper. I don't think this is what Kuyper meant, but secular, for example, was understood as a period of time, not a space.
Right.
So it's the time between Christ's coming and Christ's return.
Right.
And so that governs the political in the classic Christian introduction of things.
In other words, there are certain limits to what the political should endeavor to do.
That's right. There's a limits to what it does, and then there's almost an exposure of the political as itself creaturely, temporal, and therefore a servant rather than a master.
Right.
And I think this is the part I think that is. On the other hand, there is almost a legitimization of politics. I think this is maybe where you can go with how did it get dangerous?
Yeah.
To where if you take the political and you hold that it has a legitimate place within final and ultimate things, therefore you endow it in ways that it could become autonomous and it could actually take off, and then it could be wed to a higher purpose. Almost of perfecting the creation as part of the perfecting process of God's kingdom. And if that gets secularized, if you will, then what you do is you've introduced the political as capable of reaching perfection through its own resources and its own power, and almost forcing people into a perfect state. I mean, this is what Rousseau was very up to the perfectibility and this wouldn't have come without Christianity, in some sense, talking about the way in which we're being perfected.
Right. Well, we have, examples in the Radical Reformation of people who, amenitize the eschaton, as they say, as Vogelin said. And what became of them, generally speaking, was really bad. But now we've removed the transcendent entirely from the scene, and now it's entirely our own sort of project to create, apotheosis, to divinize ourselves, to be like gods.
That's right, but there's this notion, I think, that still comes back. I mean, you hear it in the term progress in Enlightenment countries, but you hear it in the kind of Hegelian. We'll talk more about this in another episode. The Hegelian Marxist line is that you can arrange, without the kingdom of God, right, being inbreaking in Christ's return, you can somehow, through your own muscle, if you will, and through your own resources, bring about a perfect political state of affairs, or one that gets very close. I mean, think of any system that thinks you can tear it down, tear it to the ground, and build it in a just way. I mean, any of those notions. But there is a seed here of iconoclasm. I think you said there's something Christianity brings in that if it gets ripped from the Christian vision, becomes a very dangerous thing. One would be that iconoclasm.
Yeah, I think that the more profoundly true something is, the more profoundly, I guess, evil it can be, or more sort of damage it can cause. You think about, I think this illustration works for me. When we think about nuclear power, it's something that can light a city or burn it to the ground. You've got the power being directed in different directions. Now, I'd like to spend the last part of the show just thinking a little bit about how do we, sort of recover the pre-political. How do we go about that? I have some preliminary thoughts. They're not terribly impressive proposals, but I guess maybe impressive proposals are the expertise of the totalitarians. So maybe there's always a kind of modesty to a genuinely good course of action.
It's worth noting that in Europe, the term liberal and conservative mean things very different than they do here.
Right.
The European liberal is basically, historically, the idea is that they really liked the ideas of the French Revolution. Maybe not so much the guillotine, but a lot of the other ideas.
They had me up to the guillotine.
And the conservative...
The guillotine just did it in for me.
Yeah, the conservatives in Europe were conservatives because they said that human society is way too complicated.
Right.
It to be reduced to any kind of ideology or philosophical concept or anything like that. That was to the conservative, that was the core problem of the French Revolution. Tradition was there for a reason. It worked.
Yeah, so Edmund Burke would be an example of a...
Edmund Burke, exactly,
right.
Yeah. So, grand proposals for sweeping change are the project of the liberal who thinks that he's smarter than society.
Right.
Yeah.
So, being modest, being humble, what do? How do we bring back the respect that we ought to have for... Now, in other words, because these things are natural, these things are pre-political, we don't have to make them. They just are.
Yeah.
But how do we vindicate them, protect them, that kind of stuff?
And clarify them. I think that's a big thing because, I know there are wonderful Christian communities for whom the clarification is all there. I think, however, spread across the U.S. and maybe globally, it's a very different picture. I think there's a lot of layers to this. If you're talking grand kind of work, one is we have to recapture the biblical vision of transcendence and the way that all these things are to be understood in that light. But living that, I think, is the real thing. And I think the Reformation call to the glory of God in all things, I don't think that's just a pious add-on. I think it is an orientation picture that they were able to order and understand all of these pre-political things in the right light, and because of that, it's shown as they aimed to order them that way. And I think we have to recapture the true nature of transcendence, the proper understanding of creation, nature, history, kinds and natures, and their first purposes, Genesis, and the fall and its impact, and then what true eschatology looks like when these are renewed and oriented towards Christ and our ultimate joy in God. And then I think that we have to retrieve a lot of the classic Christian vision of natural law, of a classical vision of engaging being in reality and ethics. So that's the big thing. The small scale is kind of, it's something where it's going to come, in my opinion, studying theology, it's going to come through proper formation. It's not going to come through a formulation.
Right. Okay.
And it's almost similar to virtue in character formation.
So play that out a little bit. Formation versus formulation. When you say formulation, are you talking about like programs?
Well, formulation is kind of what it's kind of like taking the idea of Christian transcendent and try to apply it as a technique to all these spheres
that's
of
a
life.
technique. Gotcha.
Whereas recovering the classic vision of ordering our loves the right way towards God and all things relative to God, and then spelling out rigorously what Scripture teaches, what the church has wrestled with in terms of family, the core and best pattern of family life, both as a sign of God's transcendent presence in the world, but also as for the flourishing of generations. I think, let me back up a different way. I don't want to, because I'm thinking on the cuff here. I think one of the things, for example, let's say we're good, committed, Scripture-centered folks, right? And we're following what the Bible teaches, and we're trying to put it into practice. We're already ahead of the game there. But the question is, Scripture itself has in it an understanding that tells us how to understand these things. So it's not just a matter of reading the Bible passage and then trying to figure out how it applies to your life. It's actually a whole orientation.
Right.
It's a whole transcendental vision that must be retrieved if we're going to actually begin to see these particulars the right way. I mean, I don't think there's a shortcut to it.
Well, I agree. I think the challenge, as you know, is that at the local church level, there's almost nobody who gets it.
Yeah.
Including the pastor. In fact, sometimes the pastor will be the last guy to get it. And be the most resistant.
Yeah.
Well, I think that this is where, in practical terms, we need to be thinking about forming what I would describe as intentional communities.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because, first of all, values, we talk about value formation. Values are not formed in a vacuum. They're only formed in community.
Yeah.
So what I would suggest is we need to team up with like-minded people across churches, across denominations, across anything, and find ways of mutually encouraging and supporting each other. Support being critically important right now in a world that's becoming increasingly hostile to the faith. People are going to lose jobs if they stay faithful.
Right.
People are going to be brought to court if they're faithful. People will be bankrupted.
Yeah.
We need these kinds of intentional communities to gather around these people who already have established relations with each other, in order to provide what's necessary there. The theoretical foundation is critical. There's no question about that. Mm-hmm. But to give it legs, you really need that kind of formal or informal organization.
Yeah, so here's the question. Is what we're describing here something that can actually be brought into being sort of in the world, the evangelical world as we know it now? In other words, so many of the things that, as far as I can see, to be the measures of success don't have anything to do with what we're talking about. And so, consequently, churches, pastors, seminaries, so forth, are really giving short shrift to this stuff, and are focused a whole lot more on getting butts in pews and making sure people feel warm and accepted,
and playing to
like
the
that.
symbol, the contemporary symbolism. I mean, I see it all the time in the seminary settings. It's all, let's make sure we've used all the buzzwords that don't prevent us from getting burnt down, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, Glenn probably got his own take on it, but I don't think it's just something that, let me think of it a different way. I don't know that I'm confident enough to say that the evangelical world will be very warm to this kind of thing on large scale, but I do think that there are many Christians within that world that understand that if something like this doesn't happen, there's really going to be nowhere for them to go.
Yeah, what I'm witnessing is that there are sort of informal and semi-formal networks that are growing, that are drawing people from a wide range of locations and even denominations, and they're finding the kind of thing that we're talking about here. It's not fully realized, but there's something that they see that their own sort of church, sort of experience is left unaddressed. It's becoming more and more obvious to them that this stuff that's being unaddressed is really, really important, and we're getting killed in those very things, those very areas. And our evangelical leadership, generally speaking, with some important exceptions, just are not to be found, or maybe even playing for the other team. Getting at. I know. I think that social media has been kind of a blessing and a curse in this whole thing. Blessing insofar as there are a lot of people who are able to find the kind of help and insight. Hopefully, our little show does its part, in this whole matter, by just helping people know that the ways that people think today, not just secular people, but even people in the church, are really a series of anomalies to the way people in the past thought. And there have been some important things that we've lost when we forgot those old ways of thinking and doing things.
Well, and I think on that level of intentional community, I think that's very much along the lines of how any of the kind of significant contributions of Christianity to social change in a positive way have happened. You think of the abolitionist movement. You think of the way in which people got around, threw these ideas together out in community, and became intentional about all the areas of their lives in which they were going to be committed to that kind of thing. But then you also is the creation of a network of support, which I think is a given. If people are going to risk for the gospel, then that becomes a burden on everyone concerned about the gospel. And so I know Robert George has a community with Niall Ferguson and others in the academic world, that anyone who ends up getting thrown out, for example, for standing up for alternative academic convictions, they've already got a growing number, an organization that comes.
That's great.
In terms of legal help and academic support, writing letters to presidents' institutions, and these people are putting legs on their convictions.
Well, Robert P. George, is a great guy, and he's a professor of jurisprudence at Princeton, and was really a tremendous source of inspiration to lots of socially conservative intellectuals in the academy, but especially in the Ivy League. And that's great. It's good to have kind of a war chest and a bunch of guys who are willing to go to bat for people, and we need that. I guess, though, getting back to kind of the lives that we lead, and the sort of where we find ourselves. What I'm getting at when I talk about the pre-political is your family, your neighborhood, your church, your friendship network. Those are really, when you think about it, some of the most important, if not the most important, relationships that you have.
Yeah.
The political is very powerful, and it can really mess up your life.
And it wants to actually get into all of those.
Yeah, it wants to get into all that stuff.
Think about this for a moment. The family, historically understood, performed an important social function, reproduction, and acculturation of children so that they could not be barbarians but become functioning members of society.
Right.
That was the reason anthropologically why marriage is given a privileged place in every society. Once you redefine marriage as any two people who decide they want to declare themselves married.
Yep, or at two inanimate objects or vegetables or something like
that. It's beyond two now, but anyway.
Well, whatever. Once you do that, once you remove the reproductive function from family, once you take that out of definition, what social function does marriage perform?
Essentially companionship.
That's not much of a social function. It does not contribute in any way to society as a whole.
Right.
So government, by redefining family, has eliminated a critical social function, just taken it completely out of the equation. Then so family suddenly is now understood in America to be something totally different from what it used to be. So when you talk about starting with your family, guess what? The government's defined that for you.
Yeah. Well, I think that's kind of what I mean.
And we can keep going. I mean, look at the restrictions on worship during COVID. Look at, there's just been a study that's come out that indicates that American men especially, but women as well, have relatively few friendships, if any.
Yeah, right.
So all of these pre-political institutions have been systematically gutted.
So my thought is that we need to go on the offensive and carve out territory and take things back. Let folks who have stepped into things that they should not have stepped into know that they're not welcome and tell them to get out.
Yeah.
That kind of edge is what we need. Anyway, we've come to the end of the show. We've got...
right when it was getting so...
Well, we're going to do another show, so maybe some of that fire can kind of carry over. I've been a little bit kind of washed out because I just got off a plane. But anyway, I'm a little weary. But I'm reviving. I'll get something with caffeine. Well, anything else you guys want to say before we wrap it up?
I think I'm good.
Yep, good.
I pretty much covered it here or in Slaying Leviathan.
That's right. So go out and buy Slaying Leviathan and tune in next time to the Theology Pugcast. We appreciate your support. Bye-bye.
Bye now.